The studio lights cast a warm glow over the set, a familiar space where laughter and applause usually filled the air. Kelly Clarkson sat in her host's chair, her smile bright but her eyes sharp, ready to dig into the heart of her guest. Across from her was Jeff Daniels, his posture relaxed but his face carrying the weight of someone who had seen a few storms. The audience settled into a hush as Kelly leaned forward, her voice playful but curious, asking about his latest project, a gritty drama that had critics buzzing. Jeff nodded, his hands clasped loosely, and started talking about the role, a man haunted by choices made decades ago. His words were measured, deliberate, like he was unpacking something heavy. Kelly, always quick to sense a deeper story, tilted her head. This character sounds like he's carrying a lot. Did you pull from something personal to get there? It was the kind of question she was known for, one that could pivot a light chat into something raw. Jeff's eyes flickered, not with discomfort but with a kind of recognition, like he'd been waiting for someone to ask. He leaned back, a faint smile tugging at his lips, and said, "You know, Kelly, sometimes life hands you moments that stick, and you don't even realize how much until you're forced to look at them again." The audience was quiet now, sensing the shift. Jeff's voice softened as he started to tell a story from his early days. Not as an actor, but as a kid from a small town in Michigan. He spoke of his father, a man who worked long hours at a lumber yard, always smelling of sawdust and sweat. He wasn't big on words, Jeff said, his eyes drifting somewhere far off. But he had this way of teaching you things without saying much. "One day, I was maybe 12, I messed up bad. Broke a neighbor's window, lied about it, got caught. I thought he'd yell, but he just looked at me, handed me a hammer, and said, 'You fix what you break.'" Kelly's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet intensity. She leaned in closer, her hands folded on the desk. Jeff went on, describing how his father made him work weekends to pay for that window. Not with money, but with labor, teaching him the cost of carelessness. "It wasn't just about the window," Jeff said, his voice steady but thick with something unspoken. "It was about owning up, about understanding the weight of what you do to others, even when you don't mean to." The story wasn't flashy, but it landed hard. Kelly's eyes glistened, and she blinked quickly, trying to keep her composure. The audience felt it too, a ripple of connection to something universal, the kind of lesson that cuts deeper than you expect. Jeff paused, his gaze meeting Kelly's, and for a moment, the studio felt smaller, like it was just the two of them. "I carried that into every role I've ever done," he said. "You don't just play a character, you carry their mistakes, their regrets, and you try to fix what's broken in them." Kelly let out a shaky laugh, dabbing at her eyes. "Okay, Jeff, you're gonna make me cry already," she said, her voice catching. The audience chuckled, but it was soft, respectful, like they were protecting the moment. She asked him to hold that thought, promising they'd dive deeper after a break. As the cameras panned out and the applause rose, Jeff's story lingered, a thread of truth that wasn't done unraveling. The weight of his father's lesson, that idea of fixing what you break, seemed to hover, waiting to connect to something bigger. As the studio lights dimmed for the commercial break, Kelly Clarkson fanned her face, trying to shake off the emotion that Jeff Daniels' story had stirred. The audience murmured, still caught in the weight of his words about his father and the broken window. When the cameras rolled again, Kelly was back, her smile a little softer but her energy "All right, Jeff," she said, leaning forward, "you left us on a heavy note there. That lesson from your dad, about fixing what you break, that's powerful. Does that still guide you? I mean, not just in acting, but in life." Jeff shifted, in his seat, his hands resting on his knees. His face was calm, but there was a flicker of something deeper, like he was sifting through memories he hadn't touched in years. "It does," he said, his voice low but clear. "It's not just about fixing physical things, you know, it's about relationships, about the messes you make with people. I've had to learn that the hard way." The audience leaned in, sensing he was about to peel back another layer. He started talking about a friend from his early theater days, a guy named Tom who was his closest confidant when Jeff was scraping by, doing small plays in dingy venues. Tom was the guy who'd tell you the truth, no matter how much it stung, Jeff said, a faint smile crossing his face. "We were both broke, sharing cheap beer and big dreams, but he had this fire, this belief we'd make it. I leaned on that." His smile faded as he went on, describing how their friendship frayed when Jeff got his first big break, a role that pulled him out of obscurity. "I got busy, got caught up in the work, the auditions, the hustle. I stopped calling, stopped showing up." Kelly's eyes were locked on him, her hands still, her usual quick wit on pause. Jeff's voice grew quieter as he admitted how he'd let the distance grow, assuming Tom would always be there. "Then one day, I heard he was struggling," he said. "Not just money, but deeper stuff. Depression, maybe. I didn't know the details because I wasn't around. I told myself I'd reach out, fix it, like my dad taught me, but I kept putting it off. Too many rehearsals, too many excuses." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. the air thick with the kind of tension that comes from hearing someone confess a regret. Jeff paused, his jaw tightening. By the time I finally called, it was too late. Tom had moved away. Cut contact. I don't even know where he is now. His voice cracked, just enough to notice, and Kelly's eyes welled up again. She reached for a tissue, half laughing, half sniffling. Jeff, you're killing me here, she said, her voice raw. That's so real. We've all let someone slip away like that. The audience nodded, some dabbing their own eyes, the shared ache of lost connections binding them to the moment. Jeff nodded, his gaze steady but heavy. That's the thing, he said. You don't realize what you're breaking until it's gone. And sometimes, you can't fix it, no matter how much you want to. Kelly took a deep breath, her hand resting on her heart, clearly moved. She glanced at the audience, then back at Jeff, her voice soft but steady. I want to hear more about how you carry that. How do you keep going when you can't fix something like that? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the segment ended, the camera lingering on Jeff's thoughtful expression, a man wrestling with ghosts he couldn't quite lay to rest. The studio lights flared back up, and Kelly Clarkson, still clutching a tissue, gave Jeff Daniels a look that was equal parts empathy and determination. Her voice was steady now, though her eyes still carried the sheen of emotion. Jeff, you just laid something heavy on us, she said, her tone warm but probing. You talked about losing touch with Tom, about not being able to fix that break. How do you carry that kind of regret and still move forward? Because I know I'm not the only one in this room who's felt that. The audience murmured in agreement, their faces reflecting the sting of their own unspoken losses. Jeff leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly, as if grounding himself. You don't really move on, he said, his voice quiet but firm. You just learn to carry it differently. For a long time, I'd think about Tom and feel this knot in my chest, like I'd failed him. But then I realized something. He paused, his eyes scanning the audience. Then settling back on Kelly. You can't undo the past, but you can make sure it shapes you for the better. That's what I try to do now, in my work, in my life. He started talking about how that regret fueled his acting, how he poured it into roles where characters grappled with their own failures. Every time I play someone broken, he said, I think about Tom, about my dad, about all the times I didn't show up when I should have. It's not about wallowing, it's about understanding what's at stake when you let someone down. His words were simple, but they hit like a quiet truth, the kind that makes you rethink your own choices. Kelly nodded, her lips pressed together as she fought back another wave of tears. That's so powerful, she said, her voice catching. You're taking something painful and turning it into something that connects with people. I mean, I'm a mess over here because I get it. She laughed softly, and the audience joined in, a release of tension that didn't break the moment but softened it. Jeff gave a small smile, but his eyes were distant, like he was still caught in the memory. He went on, his voice growing steadier. There was this one role, a few years back, where I played a guy who'd lost his best friend in a war. The script didn't say much about their history, but I filled in the blanks with Tom. Every scene where I had to look at his empty chair, I wasn't acting. I was just there, feeling that hole. The audience was silent again, the weight of his words settling over them. Kelly's hand rested on her chin, her eyes locked on him, absorbing every word. That's what art does, right? Jeff continued, his tone lifting slightly. It lets you take the things you can't fix and give them a place to live. You don't erase the pain, but you make it mean something. Kelly's eyes were full now, a tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't bother wiping it away this time, just let it fall. Jeff, you're breaking my heart, but in the best way, she said, her voice raw with sincerity. The audience applauded softly, not wanting to disrupt the intimacy of the moment. Kelly took a deep breath, glancing at the audience. I think we all need a second to process this, she said, her smile returning but softer now. But I want to know, how do you take that into your life off the set? How do you make sure you don't let those connections slip again? The question lingered, heavy with expectation, as Jeff's expression shifted, his eyes hinting at a story he hadn't planned to tell, one that might bridge the gap between the man he was and the man he was trying to be. The studio was still, the audience hanging on the thread of Kelly Clarkson's question, her voice gentle but pressing as she asked Jeff Daniels how he keeps connections from slipping away now. Jeff's eyes softened, and he leaned back in his chair, his hands unfolding as if letting go of something tight. That's the work, isn't it? He said, his tone carrying a hard-earned wisdom. Learning how to hold on to people, even when life pulls you in 100 directions. I'm not perfect at it, but I try to be intentional now. He started talking about his family, his voice warming as he described his wife, Kathleen, and their kids. Kathleen's my anchor, he said, a small smile breaking through. She's the one who calls me out when I'm starting to drift, when I'm getting too caught up in work or my own head. She'll just say, Jeff, you're doing it again. Be here. And she's right. The audience chuckled softly, recognizing the quiet power of a partner who knows you better than you know yourself. Jeff's story shifted to a moment a few years back. when he almost missed his daughter's high school play because of a film shoot. I was halfway across the country, thinking I could just send flowers and a note, make it up later. His voice grew quieter, tinged with the same regret he'd carried from losing Tom. But then I remembered my dad. That hammer, that window, I remembered Tom. And I thought, no, you don't get to keep breaking things and expect someone else to fix them. He paused, his eyes meeting Kelly's, who was watching him with a mix of awe and empathy. So I got on a red-eye flight, Jeff continued, landed at 6 in the morning, drove straight to her school. I was jet-lagged, probably smelled like airplane coffee, but I was there, in the back row, watching her shine. His voice cracked just slightly, and Kelly's hand went to her heart, her eyes glistening again. She didn't know I was coming. When she saw me after, she just ran up and hugged me. Didn't say a word. That was worth every missed flight, every rescheduled meeting. The audience let out a soft collective sigh, some nodding, others wiping their eyes. Kelly was openly crying now, her smile wide but trembling. Jeff, you're gonna make me ruin my makeup, she said, laughing through the tears. That's what it's about, though, right? Showing up, even when it's hard. Jeff nodded, his own eyes a little brighter than before, though he held it together with a practiced calm. He leaned forward, his tone shifting to something broader, almost philosophical. It's not just about family though, it's about anyone who matters to you. Friends, colleagues, even strangers sometimes. You have to decide to be there, to listen, to fix what you can before it's too late. Kelly nodded, her expression serious now, as if his words were sinking into her own life. The audience was rapt, the air charged with the kind of clarity that comes from hearing someone distill a truth you felt but never named. Kelly took a shaky breath, fanning her face again. Okay, we're all a mess here, she said, drawing a laugh from the crowd. But I need to know, Jeff, has there been a moment where someone showed up for you like that? Where someone fixed something you didn't even know was broken? Her question landed softly, but it carried weight, pulling Jeff into a memory that seemed to catch him off guard. His expression shifting as he began to answer, his voice hinting at a story that might unravel him just as much as it had Kelly. The studio lights seemed to soften, as Kelly Clarkson's question hung in the air, her eyes searching Jeff Daniels' face for the story behind his sudden pause. Has someone shown up for you like that? She'd asked, her voice gentle but insistent, pulling at a thread Jeff hadn't expected to unravel. He shifted in his seat, his hands rubbing together briefly, as if steadying himself for what came next. Yeah, he said finally, his voice quieter than before. There was someone who showed up when I didn't even know I needed it. He leaned back, his gaze drifting upward, like he was seeing the moment play out. This was years ago, when I was in my 30s, still trying to prove myself as an actor. I was doing a play, off-Broadway, nothing glamorous. I was struggling, not just with the role but with myself, doubting if I was good enough, if I'd ever be more than a guy who got lucky a few times. The audience was silent, drawn into the vulnerability of a man they were used to seeing as composed, confident. Jeff's voice steadied as he described a stagehand, an older woman named Ruth, who worked the theater's lighting crew. Ruth was tough, no nonsense, the kind of person who'd seen every type of ego come through that stage door, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But she had this way of seeing through you, not in a mean way, just clear. One night, after a rough performance, I was beating myself up in the dressing room, thinking I'd blown it. Ruth knocked, came in with a cup of coffee, and just sat there. Didn't say much at first, just let me stew. He paused, his eyes meeting Kelly's, who was leaning forward, her hands clasped, tears threatening again. Then she said something I'll never forget. Jeff continued, "You're not here to be perfect. She told me you're here to be real. Stop trying to impress everyone and just show up." It was like she saw all the noise in my head and cut right through it. His voice grew softer, thick with gratitude. She didn't have to do that. She could have just flipped the lights off and gone home. But she stayed, and that changed something in me. Kelly's tears spilled over now, and she didn't bother hiding them. "That's beautiful," she said, her voice breaking. "It's like she gave you permission to be human." The audience murmured, some nodding, others visibly moved, as if Ruth's words had reached them too. Jeff nodded, his own eyes glistening but steady. "Exactly," he said, "and that stayed with me. Every time I step on a set, I hear Ruth in my head, telling me to just show up, be real. It's why I don't chase perfection anymore. I chase truth." The room felt smaller, the connection between Jeff, Kelly, and the audience almost tangible. Kelly wiped her eyes, laughing softly. "Ruth sounds like an angel," she said, her voice warm with admiration. "Have you ever told her what that meant to you?" Jeff's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his face. Not of regret but of something unresolved, a story that wasn't quite finished. He took a breath, as if deciding how much to share, his hands stilling as he prepared to answer, the weight of that moment with Ruth still lingering, ready to lead into something deeper. The studio was hushed, Kelly Clarkson's question about Ruth still echoing as Jeff Daniels sat back, his expression caught between gratitude and a quiet ache. Have you ever told her what that meant to you? Kelly had asked, her voice soft, her eyes still damp from the weight of his story. Jeff's gaze dropped to his hands for a moment, then lifted to meet hers, a faint smile tinged with something unresolved. I tried, he said, his voice low, carrying the kind of honesty that made the audience lean in closer. He explained how after that night in the dressing room, Ruth became a quiet constant in his life during that theater run. She'd leave me coffee before shows, always with a little note, nothing fancy. Just break a leg, kid, or keep it real. I kept every one of those notes, he said, his voice warming at the memory. But I never told her how much her words that night shifted things for me. I was young, dumb, thought I'd have all the time in the world to say it. The audience was silent, sensing the turn in his story, the familiar sting of chances missed. Jeff's voice grew quieter as he described how the play ended, and with it, his time with Ruth. Theaters like that, he said, you're a family for a few months, then everyone scatters. I meant to track her down, tell her what she did for me, but life got in the way. New roles, new cities. I lost touch. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. A few years ago, I was doing a show in New York, and I asked around about her. Found out she'd passed away. Cancer, I think. No one knew the details. Kelly's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling up again. Oh, Jeff, she whispered, her voice thick with empathy. The audience let out a collective breath, some shaking their heads, others wiping their eyes. Jeff nodded, his expression steady but heavy. Yeah, he said softly, I wish I'd told her, but I try to honor what she gave me by showing up for others now, by being real, like she said. Every time I mentor a young actor, every time I listen when someone's struggling, that's Ruth's voice in my head. Kelly was openly crying now, her smile shaky but genuine. That's so beautiful, she said, her voice raw. You're carrying her with you, in everything you do. She turned to the audience, her hands outstretched. Isn't that what it's all about? Taking those moments, those people who change you, and making sure they live on through you. The crowd erupted in applause, not loud but heartfelt, a wave of agreement that filled the studio. Jeff leaned forward, his eyes bright with emotion but his voice steady. That's it, he said. You don't fix everything, but you carry the good forward. My dad, Tom, Ruth, they're all part of me, part of every choice I make now. Kelly nodded, dabbing her eyes one last time. Jeff, you've wrecked me today, but in the best way, she said, laughing through her tears. Thank you for being so real with us. She reached out, touching his arm briefly, a gesture of connection that felt like the closing of a circle. As the applause swelled, Kelly turned to the camera, her voice bright despite the tears. We're gonna take a break, but don't go anywhere, because I need a minute to pull myself together. The audience laughed, and Jeff gave a small, grateful smile, the weight of his stories settling into the room, a reminder of the power of showing up, of carrying the people who shape you, even when they're gone.